Isak doesn't have any intention of playing for Newcastle ever again, which sounds stark. It is a pretty significant development. Isak's perspective is that even if the transfer window closes and no deal has been agreed for his departure, he has no desire to be reintegrated into the Newcastle setup.
So welcome to our Manchester studio. I look like I'm in Manchester. David is dressed as if he's meant to be on the Riviera.
It was meant to be a heat wave today, 30 degrees in the northwest. And as I stepped out my house, there was biblical rain. So I feel slightly inappropriately attired.
I thought you may be having to fly to the Mediterranean for a breaking story or something.
It has happened before. So you've always got to be prepared in this industry.
Look, this chat will include everything about your role, how the transfer industry has changed maybe over the last decade. But we're recording this on the morning where you have broken the story that the Alexander Isak situation has now got to the stage where he will refuse to play for Newcastle. Really?
Yeah, so but the crux of the news we've broken on The Athletic is that Isak doesn't have any intention of playing for Newcastle ever again, which sounds stark. It is a pretty significant development. I don't think it will be a great shock to anybody privy to this matter inside, because he's not been training with the first team. He hasn't been involved in any of their pre-season games. There's no expectation he'll take part in the season opener against Aston Villa on Saturday. And of course, Liverpool have been pursuing him. They had a bid rejected. It's been well documented that he wants to go for quite some time. We're also saying in the Athletic piece, if you read it, that Isak's perspective is that even if the transfer window closes and no deal has been agreed for his departure, he has no desire to be reintegrated into the Newcastle setup. The chapter, his Newcastle career, in his head, is understood to be over, and that's sourced from contacts privy to this situation. And so it sort of lays bare the extent of his feelings and the problem that Newcastle have on their hands, and it'll be interesting to see how it resolves.
Do your contacts and sources firmly believe that is a viable way for Isak to approach this season? I.e., if Newcastle decide not to sell him, that he will, in a World Cup year as well, which I always think is really important to reiterate at this stage, in a World Cup year, that he is more than happy to sit out at least until the January transfer window.
Well, they'll know more about this than any of us, because they've been in these situations before and they're on the inside. I don't think Sweden qualified for the last World Cup. I could be wrong. And so maybe there's a chance it won't happen again. I don't think that...
Yeah, I mean, you have to be really terrible not to qualify for this World Cup.
This one, yeah, indeed.
They're made sure virtually every country in the world has an opportunity to qualify. But go on.
And they do have some pretty good strikers, as the Premier League knows. I think those sort of things are hypothetical at this point, because they're dealing in the here and now, which is clearly how can we bring about his desire, which is to leave, to move to Liverpool. They maintain their interest after that bid in the region of £110 million. There's been no subsequent offer, because Newcastle were so firm and swift in rejecting that it showed, which is their consistent stance. He's not for sale, not looking to trade him, but they are exploring alternative candidates to replace him, which will say to Isak and his people that they are making efforts to prepare for this sale. And another crucial part of this is that we report that Isak, two things. Firstly, a year ago, and this again is Isak's perspective, Newcastle made clear that they couldn't or wouldn't be offering him a new contract. One, because of their need to comply with football's financial rules, and two, because he was already on a lucrative deal until the summer of 2028. In his mind and their view is that they communicated that this would therefore be their last season at the club, and that Newcastle had plenty of time to prepare for his departure. People around Newcastle deny this. I've got to be very clear on that. They say that didn't happen, and that it was always their understanding that he would be open to all scenarios this summer, including the possibility of extending his contract. Fast forward to the end of the season, and he helped Newcastle to win the Carabao Cup, to qualify for the Champions League. And it's believed that 2 weeks before the end of the season, he told Eddie Howe that he wanted to go this summer and it would be his last season. And then again, after the final game of the season when they lost to Everton, he called Eddie Howe before flying to his homeland of Sweden and reiterated the message. So in their view, Newcastle have known about this for some time. It's not a sudden thing in the last 2 weeks of the transfer window. And Newcastle, in fairness, have been exploring the market. Ekitike first, and since they've got multiple options. It's really not a nice situation for anybody involved. And back to your original question, if this market closes and there has not been a transfer, which is Newcastle's prerogative, Isak will have to decide if he remains true to his current feeling and doesn't immerse himself back in the setup. And let's be clear, he'll have to win back Eddie Howe and the players and the club if he decides to do that.
He'll have to win back the fans.
And the fans, maybe above all of those parties, but then also what he will represent as a player after that. Is he still going to be what he was before in himself and in the minds of others? And that's why many people think this is now untenable and a solution will be found, provided both Newcastle get the sort of figure that they would want financially from Liverpool, and I guess more importantly that they've got a credible replacement or more than one for him.
So I suppose there are a couple of things there as well, which is, what is the figure that they want? Are you aware of that? Secondly, are there indications that Liverpool will go back in with a second offer if once they hear what the asking price is? And thirdly, has Isak's stance changed Liverpool's perspective at all? Because some people would say, well, if he's doing this to get out of Newcastle to go to Liverpool, could he do this in 3 years' time or 2 years' time to Liverpool to get to Real Madrid, for argument's sake?
Three very pertinent questions. Firstly, the figure. There seems to be a consensus around football and among contacts you speak to, whether they've got links to PIF, to Newcastle, to parties involved, of in the region of £150 million. There's also a sense that Newcastle and PIF won't achieve that. So that's why the initial expression of interest from Liverpool indicated they'd be keen to do a deal around £120 million. When their offer came in, it was thought to be £110 million, which I think was probably putting a marker in the ground to work their way up towards where they wanted to get. You could theoretically see it going higher than that, but still below the ideal price. But again, that's completely the choice of Newcastle and their ownership. The second question on Liverpool coming back in, they've been very quiet and sort of reserved on this. It's not like they've been throwing multiple bids in and stories coming out on what they're doing in this. It appears that they're kind of standing back and letting the situation between Isak and Newcastle unfold. And then if anybody opens the door and provides encouragement, no doubt they'll step back in. And I think it's emerged to all of us since the Community Shield that maybe they could do with some extra reinforcement in that attacking department after the players they've lost. And then finally, Liverpool's stance. I don't know. Nothing has been indicated to me that they've been put off by this in the slightest. I think what's more relevant is if we cast our mind back to previous sagas involving other players, and people will be able to list it, but it never seems to change the view of the club in pursuit of the player. They see this as a player who's committed to joining them and is showing his desire to fight his way out.
This is a question that's probably specific to Newcastle in this situation, but you could widen it out to other clubs and multi-club models. Newcastle are owned by PIF, right? PIF also own clubs in the Saudi Arabian Premier League. They then pay money to sign Darwin Núñez for 50 million, or it was Al Hilal, was it Al Hilal? 50 million for Darwin Núñez. That gives Liverpool the money there, which then could weaken Newcastle's position with Isak. From your contact, do you sense a frustration of like, what the hell are you doing?
I don't think it's that straightforward.
And that, well, football isn't.
No, exactly. It's a complex landscape. It's not an earth-shattering number that Liverpool have earned for Darwin Núñez. They will believe they could have got that from elsewhere if necessary. We don't know how tightly aligned the running of the Saudi Pro League clubs, who are majority owned by PIF, are, unless we're inside that. Yes, PIF are very heavily involved, but there is some level of independence, I think, in decision making and targets they want to pursue. And the final thing in all of this is that whether people like it or not, PIF, like all ownerships, need to run the clubs like a business because of football's financial regulations, PSR in the Premier League and FFP in Europe. And so maybe there were visions that they were just going to come and splash the cash, sell nobody. It doesn't work like that, despite them being on paper the richest owners in world football. What we have seen in the last couple of years is a fascinating example of how it's not able to run like many people thought it would.
Let me throw some other players at you then. Crystal Palace obviously beat Liverpool in the Community Shield at the weekend. Mark Gay and Eberici Eze both have clubs circling them, we are told. By the end of the transfer window, what would you expect of those two?
I think Crystal Palace would have been open to selling both of them earlier in the transfer window. A realisation that they turned down significant money. Was it 65 plus 5 from Newcastle for Mark Gahey a year ago? Fast forward to now, Palace would have hoped he might have signed a new contract. He's not showing any inclination to do that. So I think now the penny has dropped and they would like to trade him. As Steve Parish mentioned after the Community Shield at Wembley, they'd be open to the possibility. As we understand it, at The Athletic, it's joining Liverpool or staying at Crystal Palace and leaving as a free agent in the summer of 2026. So that puts the onus on Liverpool to come up with an offer. And how will Palace view that? If it's too low, do they keep hold of him? If it's acceptable, do they agree to it? And what will Mark Gahey decide in that? Does he want to go and fight with Van Dijk and Konate?
Again in a World Cup year.
In a World Cup year, which is crucial for him. He's very happy at Crystal Palace and he's the main man there. He's the captain and arguably their best player. And so there's obviously a chance he moves to Liverpool. There is still a chance he stays, so I wouldn't rule that out.
Is there
completely.
A chance that Newcastle go back for him?
No, I don't think they're planning to. They're in the process of signing Malik Thiaw to address their defensive concern. And I don't think Newcastle are on his agenda, and Newcastle were aware of that early on. And people saying they've missed out on him this summer, that's not the case. That's true of a lot of targets that Newcastle have unfairly been claimed to have missed out on, and they were not really there. I don't know, someone like Matheus Cunha, for example. A lot of people using it as a stick to beat Newcastle with they didn't go in for him. On to Eze. So again, Palace would understand his desire to move on and play at the top level at his age. I think he's 27 now. Earlier in the window, completely understandable. There's a release clause there, but teams didn't come. Arsenal looking into it, speaking to his representatives. Now Tottenham are there as well, exploring a deal alongside a deal for Savinho of Manchester City. They're exploring both separately. They would like to do both if they can, which is quite interesting at Tottenham, but not, to my knowledge, advanced on either case yet. So there's all sorts of suggestions that Eze's release clause has expired or is about to expire. But I don't think that matters too much because Palace would look for in and around the same sort of figure, whether it be 60 million. The clubs looking at him would like to bring that down. As the window moves towards a close, Palace's resistance might become a bit stronger because he's such an important player to them and they might struggle to get a replacement.
Because they haven't been that active in bringing people in this transfer market. They've only brought 2 players in, one of which is a goalkeeper.
Yeah.
And we were discussing this on the radio the other night. Stability is to be admired. It's not very sexy in transfer windows, but it is to be admired. But they haven't really been active in bringing people in if they were to lose either of these 2 players.
No, but I think there's a fair amount of work that's gone on behind the scenes at Palace in a very difficult summer with the European competition situation to line up potential targets, but they really needed to know the outcome of the Gahey and Eze situations. I would now expect least one of them to leave, maybe two. I don't think both of them will be at Palace at the end of the window, and that will allow Palace, hopefully for them, to crack on with replacements. The big question is, are those replacements still available? Have they missed the boat? I wouldn't be shocked if they replace well and go from strength to strength again. But those are two sharply concerning situations for them, and they're live now.
You mentioned Tottenham and Savinho as well. Did that move take people by surprise? And Manchester City seem to be having a little. For them, they were active very early in this window, and for them now it's about moving players on. Is it? Guardiola's always wanted to work with a smaller squad.
That's true, and Jack Grealish was the main one, I think, that they were looking to get out so he could play, and he's moved to Everton on loan. There's a £50 million option to buy. And James McAtee's on his way to Nottingham Forest. So yeah, you're right. They're in a different phase of the transfer window now. And what may follow this phase is that they try and bring one or two extra players in. For example, they've been linked with Rodrigo at Real Madrid if Savinho departs. There's concrete interest from Tottenham to bring in Savinho. It's thought he would be open to the possibility, and we've seen, by and large, Pep Guardiola doesn't stand in the way of players who want to depart. But when the stories broke, the word that came from City pretty emphatically was there was an inquiry from Tottenham. We told them he's not for sale, and that's the matter done and dusted. But with these situations, there's a lot of stances that are taken, as we've discussed with Isak, and I don't necessarily think we've heard the last of it. That's not to say this Savinho move is going to happen to Tottenham by any means. It's one that they have been working on, and that underlines the nature of so many moving parts in these transfers. You know, City even though they've transformed their squad January and this summer so far, it could yet take a very different look by the 1st of September. Very similar with Tottenham, with moving parts, a lot of anxiety among the fan base to improve further and strengthen after that Europa League win, and applying that pressure on the club. They are working hard. They have invested heavily at Tottenham, but naturally, as fans, everybody wants more, and I do expect more to happen before that market shuts.
So on a couple of other clubs, when we come to moving parts and how quickly things can change, I suppose the Manchester United's business has surprised people in the sense of maybe less so Cunha and Mbeumo, but then to still have the money to go for Sesko. Mm-hmm. And there's still the feeling that there may be more to come in, but would that depend on, the moving parts being able to, obviously it has to depend on getting some players out. But has some of their business surprised you, bearing in mind what you may have been told, I don't know, in January or at the turn of the year?
Yeah, we expected belts to be tight and the lack of European football to create a pinch, and the finances have not been in the best shape, as Sir Jim Ratcliffe alluded to, talking about bankruptcy, going bust. But there was always some room to manoeuvre, and I was very clear in my reporting on The Athletic that they had the scope to do two transfers without needing to sell. They were meant to be Cunha and Delap. Delap decided to go to Chelsea. It became Cunha and Mbeumo. They went higher on Mbeumo than they would have done on Delap, but Delap was a release clause that would have needed to be paid in its entirety, and Mbeumo is a staggered payment, so it actually may cost less to Manchester United this year than Delap would have. And then the expectation was sales, and that didn't materialise. Although you could say there was a hybrid version, because Marcus Rashford moved to Barcelona with them covering all of the salary that he will be paid, even if that's slightly reduced. Nothing on Manchester United. There are sell-on clauses for Anthony Elanga and various other players that they've traded in the past. Carreras, who's moved to Real Madrid. And that gave them some room to manoeuvre. There are clearly other things at play here that financial experts will tell you better than me, whether it be extending their revolving credit facility, whether it be using the available time, not only this summer, but in the January window until June the 30th or so in 2026 to get players out. Maybe some confidence that we don't know the reason for just yet, and we may see it in time, that there are takers for a Jadon Sancho, for an Anthony, who did well on loan at Betis last season, for a Malacia, for Erasmus Højlund, for example, too. And so that allowed them to stretch further on a striker. The indication was clear when they made a move for Ekitike at the last minute to try and get in there when Newcastle and Liverpool were squabbling over him. And it showed Manchester United had the resources because they were ready to do that transfer. He ultimately decided for Liverpool. And so they pivoted to the Sesko situation. Got to make clear, Sesko's been very high on their recruitment list, if not at the top, in the summer of 2024, in previous years. We've all heard about the Vivel connection at Salzburg and Leipzig, and he's very high on their recruitment list again this summer. They've managed to get the deal done. We'll wait and see on the payment terms for that. But we're being assured that it all fits within Manchester United's capabilities financially, and then will come the challenge to shift some of those players. No doubt some will go. Maybe they will have a challenge with others, but either this works and Manchester United's confidence is correctly placed, or it's misplaced and they're going to have a financial fair play PSR headache further down the line. I'm not sensing major worry from Old Trafford in my conversations, but with many of these things, it's not until we get to the end that we can really judge.
They've got no chance of getting Belieber in this transfer window, have they?
That was your other question, what else they might want to do. So a number 6 and a goalkeeper on the agenda. If I start in reverse order, a goalkeeper would depend on Andre Onana leaving, and there's no sign of that at the moment. So if that doesn't happen, I can't see a reputable goalkeeper arriving, but it is on the recruitment agenda, whether it be now or in the future. And then the number 6 is absolutely essential in their mind. And at the top of that list is Carlos Baleba. And Ruben Amorim is said to be a big fan. Manchester United are exploring that situation, and conversations have been held with Brighton via intermediaries working on their behalf to try and ascertain a number, a price. That hasn't happened so far at the time of recording. Brighton have made clear that they don't intend to sell him, that they would prefer to keep him for at least another year. I don't know of them being under pressure to do so. My colleague on The Athletic, Laurie Whitwell, is reporting alongside me that Belieber is thought to be in favour of the possibility, and that personal terms wouldn't be a problem if it ever came to that. Multiple Manchester United players, you can imagine who, given links to him from Lille, Euro, for example, maybe Cameroon internationals who he plays with at Manchester United, I don't know precisely the names, have been in contact with him, explaining the project and talking about the potential move. And many people on both sides don't see this happening, but you could say you've got to be in it to win it. There's no harm in knocking at the door and asking the question. That's what United are doing. If a price comes back and it's too high, I presume it doesn't go further. If it's potentially achievable, maybe they continue to explore it. And one thing that you could say is deserving of credit on Manchester United's part is that there is expected to be a fierce battle for Belieber, whether it be next summer or in the future, with some really big guns coming in for him in the number 6 position. So perhaps Manchester United thought, why not try and get ahead of that, be proactive for once, and not for once, but be proactive and give it a whirl. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, so be it.
Easier or harder to do your job now than, say, I'm just talking about around transfers, not all the other stuff that you do, but in transfer windows, easier and harder to do your job now, given the number of people that are involved in all of these, and you've mentioned those, given social media, given in the know accounts, fan accounts, all of that kind of stuff, easier or harder than 5 years ago?
Different,
right?
Because it's harder in the sense that there is an absolute ocean of information and speculation, fact, and everything else in between. That ocean, unlike most in this world, seems to be growing, and it's incredibly hazardous to navigate those waters and separate right from wrong, and then on top of that, the agendas and the egos and the various factors that we've discussed. So your head is frazzled with a lot of this stuff. Not only the fact that we're often dealing with multiple situations, jumping between clubs and stories and players, and everybody involved in those situations thinks they're the most important person in the world. I totally get that, because it's such a crucial thing for them. And you're trying to treat everybody with the same respect, and and I've always said it, whether it be a non-league story or transfer or a Champions League level one of the biggest in the world, your values and your ethics should be identical, and your approach. So harder in the sense that there are so many more producers. Clearly, transfer news is very lucrative. It's doing well for companies, for outlets, for individuals. Anyone can be a producer of it through social media or online or podcasts or radio or television. People can be really well connected, even if it's in a random sense. They don't necessarily have to have come through journalism courses or have editorial guidelines on them. But also it can lead to a rise of a lot more fake news and inaccuracies and people pushing things for the wrong reasons. And that's where I'm going to pivot into, it's also become easier because the people involved in these situations seem keen to work with people with integrity and who go about things properly more than ever, because it allows them to explain and to get the right news reported and with authority. And so I find that more people, as I go through and hopefully build a decent reputation of me and The Athletic, and it was the same at the BBC previously, for actually picking the phone up or responding to messages or agreeing to meet, so that they stand a greater chance in this Wild West of being able to sift through it in a way that is to their desire.
So how much, you've always been very good at crediting other people when doing your stories or when breaking stuff or when reviewing stuff. So Tim on X sent us a message saying when you credited the In The Know social media account Indicalia, is that right? For a transfer story, maybe sound old. For a transfer story recently, the internet went mad. What do you make of the channels? Have they become more legit recently? Did it feel strange to credit one?
No, I mean, there's a basic principle with me that any time I see a story that I know to be legitimate, maybe I've been working on it and I'm holding back, which is another awkwardness about when your relationships are so good. You have a lot of information that maybe you don't release straight away, and in this day and age it comes out more often than not. And so whether I like it or not, there are times where if somebody has done something, it's legitimate news, maybe I was going to report it or I then find out is accurate, which was in the case of Belieber, then just nod to these people. It's absolutely fair. Sometimes I miss the news, and I'm sorry to people, and some people get quite angry about that you haven't attributed it to them, and sometimes I'll go back or I'll report on it the next time, and we'll do it then. Frankly, I do find the crediting thing a bit difficult. It's got a bit out of control. I would be in, and it's very nice, and I'm grateful when people do it to me, but it would probably be better if people just get on with their work. And
has it become very competitive? Is it a very competitive space during a transfer window? Do you have a picture of Fabrizio Romano on a dartboard?
I mean, he's absolutely fantastic. No one's close to him in terms of his numbers and the reputation he's built, and his work speaks for itself. And there are a number of other really good operators out there who I could not respect more. And I don't think the competition is unhealthy. I think everybody's trying to be quick. We always need to put accuracy before the speed. If you can marry the two up, then that's perfect. You win some, which is great, and you lose some, which is disappointing. But all is fair in love and war. Like it's child's play, really. It doesn't matter, and I couldn't have greater admiration for Fabrizio and everybody else trying their best. Just back to your point, I didn't dodge it purposefully. So the credit for that story was like I would have. I think there was a similar one earlier this summer when Arsenal made a move for Mosquera, and it came out via an account called Hand of Arsenal, I think, that's built a bit of a reputation, and you credit then, it would be the same, unless there's a reason not to, like there's a actual thing I'm not comfortable with, or you've got reason to doubt the legitimacy of an account or an outlet. But I would do it for mainstream journalists and peers who I respect greatly, and rightly so. But there are some people working out there who are working incredibly hard and the right way. I'm not saying everyone, and are maybe getting more accurate stories than many of us, and so you should nod to them. Although some thought has to go into it, and that's where I'll answer your question. So that a lot of people responded to me sort of saying, why did you credit? I didn't realize it was going to go so big, by the way. But I don't know the history that people have been raising to me about sort of where that account came from and what stories and speculation and they issued. But a few people have mentioned to me that they've met the guy and it's credible, and there are some people working on it. So I just thought, why not? I had no reason not to, and then I reported it myself. And so yeah, it's a funny environment, and I also don't think we should take it so seriously either. I know you don't.
Well, I'm completely oblivious to it the majority of the time. I don't think we should take football too seriously at all. It's meant to be fun and entertaining. Final thing, because you mentioned Mosquera there, we've done this whole podcast and not mentioned Arsenal at all, so I don't know whether their fan base will be happy about that or frothing at that. I can't work it out. But that's because everything just is very calm. They've just gone and done their business, and they've had such a good window. Maybe one more.
Yeah, I think. Well, we did touch upon them with Eze, and so let's see if that happens. They've got an interest in him, and I think they're in and among the sort of conversations. It may activate later in the window. Eze, I think it's well documented as an Arsenal fan, or grew up as an Arsenal fan, would be in favour of a move there. I think it was being looked at when there was a possibility of Ethan Nwaneri, the young talent, leaving because he was into the last year of his contract, because Arsenal now see him in the 8 to 10 role as opposed to the right side where he played last season. And Eze occupies the same space. They've got Martin Odegaard around there, and they've got Max Dowman coming through, and hopes could not be higher for him. So I think Eze would have been seen as a natural...
And this time Madueke as well.
And Madueke as well, more for the wide areas. So if Nwaneri had departed, I think the idea was not Madueke, that was independent. It was Eze. Nwaneri signs his new contract, and so Eze is a less pressing concern. I think the left side is an area that Arsenal were thinking of as a priority, but that would take whether it be a Trossard or a Martinelli, and I'm not aware of any of that brewing at this point. They've also got Madueke, who impressed when he played there against Athletic Bilbao off the bench. So there could be some more movement in that department, but I think it would depend on outgoings. To your original point, Arsenal obviously came into this window with a new sporting director in Andrea Berta, vastly experienced and widely respected. And it's not a competition. You know, people talk about Edu previously and Jason Ato, who had the role on an interim basis, and going back, your Raul Sanlehis and your Sven Mislintats and even your Arsene Wenger, David Dean, Dick Law triumvirate. They had a clear plan, clearly. The centre-forward position, they wanted to strengthen. A pretty diligent process that spent a lot of time on Sesko historically. He was still in the mix, but Berta clearly had an affinity with Gyökeres and others at the club that gradually, I think, came on board, and that really does look like potentially a very good value for money deal if he scores the goals, which is crucially what they needed. And then they wanted to always bring in some strength in the wide areas. There's been a long held search for backup to Bukayo Saka for when he's got injured or when he's not available, and so they looked at Brian Mbeumo before he elected for Manchester United. And Madueke came on the radar after Mbuemo. There were all sorts of rumours of like Rodrigo, who some inside the Emirates were very fond or are very fond of. I've mentioned many players in that position in the past. Arsenal fans seem to always pick me up on mentioning Anthony Gordon. They like him. I never said there was going to be a transfer, but there are loads of options. And then, in defence they needed greater depth, and so Mosquera came in, and let's see if something happens with Kivior. There's some interest in him, and the one that they had already lined up that Berta helped push over the line, that Edu and Ato had worked on, was Zubimendi, who I think could be one of the best signings in the Premier League.
I think that's the signing of the transfer window so far.
This summer. Absolutely magnificent.
Value, the money and how they've done it.
Yeah, this is a top player for club and country. We know Liverpool tried to sign him last summer, and that speaks volumes because of the quality of Liverpool's recruitment department. And so, they have done a lot of business at expense. They probably need to get some more out, whether we see some movement with, say, Zinchenko, Fabio Vieira, Reece Nelson. Underpinning this all is the Arsenal ownership, the Kroenkes, KSE, who have invested heavily in particular since taking full ownership of the club. And they've got an executive team of sort of Tim Lewis, who's been increasingly influential there. They have Richard Garlick, who replaced Vinay Venkatesham when he left as chief executive. They've got a really highly rated individual there who's working on transfers and contracts called James King. He was a legal counsel at Arsenal, went off to the PFA, and has come back to Arsenal, and is said to be absolutely integral to their operation. And then they've got Mikel Arteta, who's central to all of this. But before Arsenal beat Athletic Bilbao last weekend in their friendly, there seemed to be some crisis in the fan base after they were beaten by Villarreal. So they go to Old Trafford in a huge game that I'll be at, and maybe you will too. And they've got to deliver this season, because externally, definitely there will be pressure on Arteta to get over the line after 3 second-place finishes. No trophy since the 2020 FA Cup. He will have high expectations on himself. I don't sense the same internally, because they're right behind him. They back him wholeheartedly. They always have, even when there was pressure at the start and people were calling for him to go. And they want to succeed with him. But it will be a major season for Arsenal.
Good to see you. You've given me 40 minutes or so you probably need to turn your phone on, I think.
Yeah, I've probably missed the big scoop.
Yeah, always my fault.
The Sports Agents
with Gabby Logan and Mark Chapman.